Okay, tonight, back in Mark chapter 8, and I've titled this Lessons Repeated. And at first blush, if you were just kind of plowing through the Gospels, this is one of those sections where you would just kind of, your eyes roll back in your head and kind of glaze over. You're like, more of the same. But let me tell you, this is actually quite the opposite. This is one of those sections that kind of sneaks up on you, and then you get the biggest aha moment. Not just in Bible study, but in the spiritual journey, when you realize, why did Mark write this the way he did? And why did Jesus do the things the way he did them? And it all comes out in this section. We're only going to look at half the chapter, but it's quite a bit of text and several different scenes. But they all relate, and it's all for the singular same reason. Let me give you an idea of why somebody might balk at this to start with. First of all, you'll see in the white on the left, those are the passages we've already studied, and in the yellow is the theme of that passage. And then here we are in chapter 8, and we're basically doing the same thing again. So back in chapter 6, 31 through 44 was the feeding of the 5,000. And now we're going to have the feeding of the 4,000. Okay, two very, very similar miracles. Why include both of them? Matthew's the only other one that mentions the feeding of the 4,000. A lot of people thought maybe it was just two ways of referring to the same miracle. Mark makes them distinct. But why go into detail about both of them? And then there's this episode where they cross the Sea of Galilee and they land on the other side. He mentions that. And then there's conflict with the Pharisees about particular teachings of Jesus. And then there's a conversation about bread. Okay, there first is a conversation. Remember the woman who said even the dogs get the crumbs that fall. And now we're going to have a conversation about the manna in the wilderness. It's a conversation about bread. And then there's a healing. One was sight, one was hearing. And then there's a confession of faith that kind of ends out each section. But isn't that amazing? Somebody noticed that there was this parallel structure. And it makes you ask the question, why?
Important.
It's important, and it assumes something. It assumes something we all know something about. Not everybody learns the first time they hear it, including the disciples. What Jesus was trying to convey to the multitudes, and especially to his disciples, they apparently did not get the first time. And he's going to pound it home. In fact, after this section, from here to the end of the book, Jesus focuses only on the disciples. I mean, it's a hard pivot. And one disciple in particular. Okay, we'll get to that here in just a moment. But first, let's start working our way through and see if we can figure out what the overarching theme is and why is he repeating these miracles. So it's important to say, okay, it happened, but why did it happen? So the first is the feeding of the 4,000. And so this miracle is similar to the miracle we saw before, but did the disciples learn what they should have learned? Looking at the first 4 verses as we start. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to them and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. Okay, so they're away from the city. And these people came to hear Jesus, and they've not left. And he's been teaching for 3 days. You thought I went long. Okay, I go 40 minutes, right? 3 days he's been teaching. I don't doubt these people had a little backpack with some food in it, a little satchel, some snacks, chocolate-covered raisins or something, kind of something good, when you get that gnawing and you can't concentrate because you're hungry. But that food was gone day one, and they're still there. Now, the interesting thing is, who brings it up? Okay, this is Jesus called his disciples, and Jesus says, I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. Verse 3, if I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered, verse 4, but where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? Okay, why? Why is this conversation even happening, right? Because what has happened before this? 2 chapters ago, but many months ago in real time, was the feeding of the 5,000. Do you think the disciples forgot that happened? No way. Because remember, it was a big lesson to them because they each had a basket full to carry after the fact. Nobody's forgetting that miracle. In fact, it's one of the most famous miracles other than the resurrection. It's in all 4 Gospels. The disciples had not forgotten the feeding of the 5,000. So why is it up to Jesus now? So day 3, are the disciples hungry? Yeah. I mean, maybe Peter and Andrew went and dropped a line in the sea and reeled in a fish or something, but surely they understand. Surely everyone understands that there's something amiss. So why do the disciples not initiate this? The previous miracle had to make an impression on them. Did they not think Jesus could repeat it? Or did they not think he would?
Have faith.
Something to do about faith. Something to do about Jesus. Now, I have a theory as to why I think they didn't bring it up. We as people, there's a universal condition. We all have this tendency, it's our default, to rely on ourselves, right? It's not our default to rely on God. You don't get up in the morning and, oh no, I'm out of I don't have any coffee beans. You don't fall to your knees and look up to heaven. Oh Lord, thou didst make the coffee plant. You could fill my cup. Even you, Lord. No, what do? We don't even think about that. I don't remember the last time I prayed for coffee. I get in my car and I drive over to the co-op and I get my Antonio coffee, or however you say that. I get my whole beans because I like to grind it myself. Feels like I'm doing something. No, we have a default towards self-reliance. And so depending on Jesus, even when we know he is capable, is not second nature. It's contrary to our nature. The disciples knew Jesus could do something about the multitudes. They knew he had the power, but they didn't ask. They didn't ask. And when you read that story at first, it's kind of surprising. Well, why didn't they ask? Well, let me ask you this. Why don't you ask? Why don't I ask? Why is our default always to self-reliance rather than going to the one who has the power, who has the compassion, who has demonstrated in the past that he can do great things? Why is that our last resort? Oh, I've done everything I can. I might as well pray. Versus maybe late on day 1. I think people were running out of food. Hey, Jesus, can you do that again? That's not our nature, and it's not the disciples' nature again. Which you said that's a question of faith. It is. But why would they be struggling with faith at this point when they've seen what he can do? And here's the other part of this. Maybe they don't really appreciate who he is. And that's the thing, hang on to that kernel. Do they really, who is he? I mean, who is he? Well, he's going to ask, at the end, the last section we're going to see, who do people say that I am? Okay? But now, if you really know who he is, would you hesitate? If you really know and believe. So verse 5, Jesus is still talking because the disciples have done nothing. How many loaves do you have, Jesus asked? 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground, and when they had taken 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute among the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. That means their hunger was satiated. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. So he asked them basically the same questions that he asked during the feeding of the 5,000. And even then, they're not like shocked. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I know where he's going with this. You know? Because it's just not their nature. Jesus, his provision for the people was, again, adequate. It was sufficient. It wasn't super abundant. He didn't give them more than they needed, but there was enough excess to leave a lasting impression. So do we believe Jesus, and do we really know who he is? Asking for a sign. Continuing in verse 9, it says, after he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples, and he went to the region of Dalmanutha. Now, so this is the part where he's crossing the sea again. He did that before, he's doing it again. Just on a Bible study, this is kind of an interesting thing because it's the only reference we're going to find to Dalmanutha. When we go to the parallel passage, because Matthew also writes about this, he refers to it as Magadan. Not Magdala, he calls it Magadan. And these are, Magadan and Dalmanutha are archaeological mysteries in a sense, but there is one possible solution. First of all, Magadan, I think Matthew was naming the town, and because the word Dalmanutha literally means in Aramaic, it's an Aramaic word, it literally means the harbor. I think Dalmanutha was the harbor of Magadan, of the town. And so they crossed the sea from where they were over to, and this is between, I've got a map here. This is going to put us between Tiberias and Capernaum. So it's going to be in this area, not far from Capernaum. Remember, they had been down here in the south in the region of the Decapolis. They crossed back the Sea of Galilee, and so they're at a town here. Now, the town's not been found, but very nearby in that area is the town of Magdala. And so some people think that this is just an alternate spelling of the town of Magdala, which, of course, everyone's heard of. Mary from Magdala. Her name wasn't Mary Magdalene. She was Mary the Magdalene. She was from Magdala. And that's a town, that's the most obvious town when you stand on Mount Arbel overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Down to your left, you'll see Magdala. And the ruins are there, and it became a Christian town over the centuries because of Mary's references there for her history. The town is historically significant just because they processed fish there. That was a place to dry out and salt fish so that it would keep. Anyway, that's just a little note. What happens there is of interest to us. Verse 11, the Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. And again, this is something we've seen before. They are showing up. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, these religious leaders keep showing up not to learn from Jesus. They keep showing up to test him in order to trap him. They're trying to do one of those gotcha moments. I had the misfortune of watching a couple of minutes of some Senate hearing today from Washington, D.C., and a person just asking the other person a question just so they can get a gotcha answer, right? Nobody wants to really learn anything. It's like, if I can get you to say something that agrees with my side, I got you, I win. And that's all the Pharisees were doing. We need to catch Jesus in a trap so we can justify what we really want to do to him, which was what? They want to kill him. Yeah. So the Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given it." Then he left them, got back in the boat, and crossed to the other side. I mean, he just arrived, and they show up. It's like, get me back in my boat. I'm out of here. Now, this is a very brief encounter. Matthew gives a little more detail. I want to look at that really quick, and then we'll talk about it. So jumping over to Matthew 16, verses 1 through 4, the Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, when evening comes, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in morning, today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. You know how to interpret the appearances of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. And we love to do that here in Atenas, don't we? I mean, I tell people, it's funny because when we have guests and we get these groups come in, they'll be drinking their coffee out here on my patio, and I'll walk in, I'm like, it's going to be a hot one. I'm like, how do you know? I said, clear sky. Clear sky is the worst. Whenever the sky is clear over Mount Pulos there, it's going to be hot. What do I really know? I know it's going to be hot anyway, but they're always impressed. I am an interpreter of the signs. And if it's like October, I'll look out and say, it's going to rain today. How do you know? I know, I can tell. I can tell because it's October, right? Okay, Jesus says in verse 4, a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Then Jesus then left them and went away. So Matthew adds a little more detail. Why doesn't Mark include this aspect of, the sign of Jonah? Because that's not the point. Mark is not trying to explain exactly what Jesus was teaching there. He's showing the exasperation with the religious leaders who were just looking for a trap. Now, the interesting thing is, why doesn't Jesus want to give a sign? I mean, he's doing miracles all the time. Well, those are actually two different things. In the Greek, they're two different words, sign and miracle. The word sign, as it's used here, is never used to describe a miracle. It's never. It's what they're asking for is they want some authentication from God for Jesus' claim to his identity. And remember, what was one of the key issues in the last section? Do they really understand who he is? And now the Pharisees come along, they don't want to know who he is. But they want some kind of sign. Where are your papers? Show me that you're from God. You got to prove it. They're not asking for a miracle, they're asking for validation. Anybody ever ask you to prove that you exist? Prove that you exist. Can you prove that you're your father's child? Right now? No, you can't. You can tell me you are.
With a birth certificate?
Well, what is that?
Exactly.
You got the years on you?
No.
Oh, so you can't. Yeah. No, but I mean, what did Jesus have?
No.
Yeah. He spoke as one of authority. There's a question of faith. Do we believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the one sent from God? This is his identity. Well, does his life cause us to believe that his word is truthful? Because ultimately it's a question of faith, isn't it? Do I need to prove to you that Jesus is who he said he is? Oh, I hope not. Because everybody's going to have a different standard of proof. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees had theirs. So they said, give us a sign. We need authentication. And this, they ask, after he has fed the 4,000, the 5,000, he's risen the dead, he's healed the blind, he's made the lame to walk again, he's walked on water, he's preached truth as one having authority. After all of that, we need a sign. Now Matthew adds on because his Jewish audience will understand. Mark doesn't include it because his Gentile audience in Rome wouldn't understand, but Jesus did say, there's one more sign. But it's a sign that doesn't serve the purpose now, right? What is the sign of Jonah? As Jonah was buried in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be buried. Or Jonah was in the whale, the fish, right? And so shall the Son of Man be buried in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. So the sign of Jonah was death and resurrection. That's the sign. And that's not going to help you in your day-to-day. Because that only comes after they kill Jesus and he rises from the dead. So Mark doesn't mention that because it's not relevant to the point. Is the Pharisees continued to question Jesus' identity.
That's what happens when you have a hidden agenda.
That's exactly what happens when you have a hidden agenda. They're not there to learn anything. They're not like taking notes. Hey, this is good stuff. Somebody should publish this. Let's get this down. No. They're there with their own agenda to catch him in a word that they can show he's disloyal to Rome, and they can be executed, or he's committed blasphemy. We can stone him on the spot. But this is the turning point, this verse right here. Verse back in Mark, verse 13. It's the turning point where he now is going to focus just on his disciples. Why? Because he's preparing to leave, and he's got to make sure they're ready to take over. The next lesson is the yeast of the Pharisees, and this is another bread discussion. The disciples, verse 14, had forgotten to bring bread except for one loaf they had with them in a boat. That is probably one of the funniest verses in the entire Bible. I mean, this is just out and out humor, in my opinion. These guys shamed so many times for not having what they need. And like, who brought the bread? You know, and one of the disciples pulls out, well, I brought some for me. You know, there's one loaf. It's like, and it's not even, you know, it's probably a little loaf. It's probably half eaten, right? But they're sitting there focused on mundane, where their next meal is coming from. Jesus, be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Now, hang on to this. This is important. Notice that sentence. Because you've not heard Jesus talk like this. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. Okay, yeast of the Pharisees. Okay, it kind of makes sense if I think about it. But Herod, all right, let's continue. Now, the disciples, discussed this with one another and said, is it because we have no bread? Okay, they're still not firing on all cylinders here. They think he's worried about the bread. Jesus just fed 4,000. He's worried about bread. You didn't bring enough. We're going to starve. Okay, verse 17. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see and understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see? Do you have ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you pick up? 12, they replied. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? They answered 7. He said to them, do you still not understand? So let's make sure we understand. The Pharisees and Herod, the leaven-like teaching. What is leaven? Leaven is what makes bread rise, right? Yeast, leaven. There's a time for Jews to use it, just make it a normal loaf. There's a time for them to clean everything out of the kitchen when they're getting ready for Passover, because then they make unleavened bread. That's a reminder that they left Egypt in haste and they didn't give the bread time to rise. Okay, normally, leaven, nothing wrong with using leaven in cooking. Okay, leaven makes bread wonderful. I love bread. All right. Now, but the idea is it takes a little bit of leaven, it infects the whole bunch, right? A little bit of leaven goes a long way. And so he uses that as a metaphor, the leaven-like teaching of the Pharisees. What is it he was talking about? Well, the last time we saw him interact on a teaching basis with the Pharisees, they accused him of doing things by the power of the devil. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, they're questioning his identity. He's not from God, he's from the devil. Herod, interestingly, when word about Jesus got around to Herod, this is Herod Antipas, this is the one who's in charge of Judea right now. When word about Jesus and what he was doing got back to Herod, do you remember Herod's response? Do you remember how he reacted? He said, oh no, it's John the Baptist. He's come back to punish me. Why would John the Baptist come back? Well, because Herod kind of liked John. He didn't like what he was teaching, but he kind of liked him. He was interested. And then Herod got carried away with himself, made a promise to a woman that he had to live up to because he did it in front of everybody else. The woman wanted John the Baptist's head because she didn't like what John the Baptist was saying about her. And so Herod had John's head cut off. Now Herod hears about Jesus, and his first thought is, oh, this is basically the reincarnated, resurrected ghost of John the Baptist. What is Herod's problem? What is Herod's yeast? He doesn't understand Jesus' true identity. Isn't that incredible? So here's Jesus. He has just been teaching his disciples for the second time to make it really clear who he really is. And they still don't get it. And he said, listen, be careful. Be careful what you're listening to. If you start listening to the Pharisees, you're going to miss who I am. Just like Herod missed who I am. See, in the miracle, the two miracles of the feeding of the multitude was very intentional. Let me take you back to, I'm not even going to go there in the scripture, but just remember, you know the story. Exodus chapter 16. The nation of Israel has just been led by Moses out into the wilderness. They left Pharaoh in the dust. And now they didn't pack enough lunch either. Right? And they're all hungry. God, because God's compassionate, God decides to provide for them. And so in the evenings, they get crows. You can eat crow. It's a good thing. We got them around here. So things get really tight in the apocalypse. We always got crows. Here they call them grackles. Are they grackles? Are the grackles a crow? Grackles a crow. Yeah, I think so. Type or anyway. We got them around here. We got plenty of birds. Don't think I could eat a toucan though. That just seems wrong, you know? Yeah. Tastes kind of Fruit Loopy. But in the mornings they would get up and there was fresh manna. Every morning it was fresh. You could only pick what was for that day, except on right before the Sabbath. You could pick 2 days worth because you're not allowed to work on the Sabbath. But every other day you pick 1 day's worth. If you got too much, it would spoil. This was such an important miracle that Moses put some in a jar and put it into the Ark of the Covenant next to the 10 Commandments and Aaron's rod that budded and turned into serpents and all that kind of stuff. Manna, bread from heaven. The word literally means, what is it? Right? It was something. It said it was sweet like honeycomb, looked like coriander. Bread from heaven. And they can make all kinds of things with it. My wife makes all kinds of things with everything. She's got something new. She's always trying new recipes on y'all. You guys are brave. You don't know. She's doing experimental stuff in there. She got like test tubes and lab rats and all kinds of stuff. I wish she'd have been alive during that time. What she'd have made with manna. She'd have been manna muffins, manna pound cake.
Yeah.
You know, manna, gluten-free manna wafers. All kinds of stuff. What was the point? God's provision is the bread of life. John 6, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. These miracles where Jesus reproduced the loaves was supposed to be a neon sign for everybody. I'm here. I am the manna. The thing that Moses did, that was a parlor trick, so to speak, not putting down Moses or God's miracle there, but that was a foreshadow. That was meant to say when God comes, when the Messiah comes, bread from heaven. Even when we get to the end of his ministry, what communion, right? What does he do? He takes bread. When he breaks it, he says, take, eat. This is my body broken for you. So you understand Jesus is a little frustrated. Deuteronomy 18:18, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I'll put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I commanded him. Guess who that is? That's Jesus. 2 more miracles quickly. Healing the blind, and this is a healing. We had the deaf, and now we have the blind. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Why? Well, if you remember earlier in Jesus' ministry, he had performed so many miracles in Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Chorazin, 3 towns. And still, most of the people there rejected Jesus. And one day he calls on a curse. He curses Bethsaida. He curses Chorazin. He said, if the miracles which had been performed in you had been performed in Sodom, they would have believed and they'd still be here to this day. So from that day on, guess what he never did in Bethsaida? He never taught. He never healed. That town was cursed. You know what way you can... Some great shops in Bethsaida. They're about 6 feet underground. Okay, there's nothing there now. It's just ruins. No one has ever rebuilt that town. It's cursed. So he shows up in Bethsaida. A guy. Now this is just an individual. I don't think this guy is from Bethsaida. He just heard Jesus was there. He shows up. So the first thing Jesus says, I can help you. We're going to step out of town. So they take a little walk to the edge of town because Jesus has taken this very seriously. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, do you see anything? He looked up and said, I see people, they look like trees, walking around. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and his eyes were open, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home saying, don't even go into the village. And several things here. First of all, the last part first. Some people are like, oh, this is just Jesus trying to control the crowds again. No, don't go into that village. That village doesn't get evangelized anymore. Go anywhere else. Don't go there. Now, this is the only miracle recorded in Mark which was not instantaneous. You know, Jesus, I think, put spit on his fingers, put them on his eyes. There's a couple ideas about this. People say that in that era that they believe spit was a healing salve. And you kind of think about it, it kind of is. It's always been that case. What happens when you cut your finger? Where do you put it? You put it right in your mouth. Dirty, doesn't matter how dirty it is. It's your instinct. Because saliva does cauterize. And so there was the idea that this was cleansing. But I think there's something bigger here because I think this miracle is included to go along with this entire theme, the identity of Jesus. So here's a blind man, doesn't know Jesus. And so Jesus is taking this guy through a faith process so that he can learn and believe as he goes and respond to the work of Jesus gradually. You know, so it's probably not an accident that the metaphor for spiritual darkness is, we call it spiritual blindness. That's what that means when people don't understand the spiritual truths. In many ways, the disciples were still spiritually blind. And so the idea is Jesus is going to give them a little bit of help and then a little more. So here he helps this man. This man was not born blind because he knows what trees look like. So the man's regaining his sight after having lost it. And Jesus asks him, not for his own benefit, but for the disciples, what do you see? The man says, well, it looks like trees. And then he does a little more, and then the man understands. I think this is a great example of what's happening with the disciples. Okay, we fed 5,000, we kind of get it. They fed 4,000, we're starting to get it. And by the time he unleashes them on the world, they get it. So it's a picture of this gradual stage after stage of growth and maturity and development. And it's an example for the disciples. See, reality is all of us, before we know Jesus, we are completely spiritually blind. Spiritually blind, meaning we don't see the truth. When we accept Christ, Paul describes in Corinthians, he says, we now see through a glass darkly. I've got some tinted windows on my van. Whenever I pull into a parking garage, I got to lower my window. My tent's a little too dark for the darkness of the parking garage, and I don't want to hit something. Because it's a little harder to see through dark glass, right? So that's how it is when we're young and new believers. We haven't been in the Word. We haven't walked with God long. We see through glass. We can see. We see there's something outside, but it's subdued a little bit. You know how Paul describes what it'll be like when you finally meet Jesus face to face? You'll see him clearly. Clearly. Right in front of you. So you go from blindness, seeing through glass, then face to face. So it's a beautiful picture. Why is this important? Well, again, it's all about identity. This was a prophecy from Isaiah 29:18. In that day the deaf will hear the words of the scroll. We saw that miracle last week. Out of the gloom and darkness, the eyes of the blind will see. And so many times Jesus healed the blind. So many, many times. Why? Because this was the promise. You'll know the Messiah because he gives sight to the blind. And it all leads up to this last story. We call this Peter's confession. Again, greater detail in Matthew, but let's look at what Mark has. Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. This is to the north, about 25 miles north of Capernaum. So they've gone up the Jordan River. By the way, the Jordan River, the headwaters of the Jordan, start at the base of Mount Hermon. Do you know you can go skiing in Israel? You can go skiing at Mount Hermon. Unless they're shooting at you. Okay, but the base of Mount Hermon, the snow melts, and then the springs from underneath form the headwaters to what becomes the Jordan River as it trickles down into the Sea of Galilee. Then from the Sea of Galilee, you have the Jordan River proper all the way down to the Dead Sea. So they're up here at the very high part, border of what's now Lebanon. And it's, okay, we got animals out there. So they're at Caesarea Philippi, and this is the location. Sorry, I got bumped here. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" See, that's the whole point. Who do people say that I am? They replied, "Some say John the Baptist," like Herod. "Others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." And he only asked that question so he could ask this question. "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." This is evidently very few of Jesus' followers believed he was the Messiah. Why do I say that? Because when he says, "Who do people say that I am?" nobody said, "Oh, some of them are saying you're the Messiah." They weren't saying that. They were saying all the other, one of the prophets, Elijah, John the Baptist. No. But who is he? He's the Messiah. So when he finally asks them, Peter speaks up. Now, this is another watershed moment in Scripture, because Peter, up to this point, had only been mentioned like twice. After this, in this book, he's mentioned like 9 times. And all the other Gospels lead up to this point, and Peter's barely mentioned. And then after this, he's the most prominent disciple. Why? Because he stepped up to fulfill the role that God had called him to step into his identity as this rock for the church, for this one who would be a leader. He steps into it. But Peter here is speaking for all the disciples. I think all the disciples thought, yeah, Jesus is the Messiah. And but Peter's the one that spoke up. Actually, twice before this, Peter's mentioned 16 times after this. In Matthew, 5 times before, 18 times after. In Luke, 4 times before, 16 times after. In John, 4 times before, 29 times after. So Peter's taking on a big chunk. God is going to use him in a great way. Now the Christ, Christos, is the Greek word. The Hebrew word is Messiah. The English word is anointed. That's all it means. It means you're the chosen one for God. to come and do God's plan. He was God himself, anointed to come to give his life to pay for the sins of humanity. This is important. Identity. Who is he? The chapter ends, or the section ends in verse 30. It says, Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him.
My time had not come.
What's that?
My time had not come. His time hadn't come yet.
Exactly. His time, the full revelation, where everybody now knows that he is not just claiming to be the Messiah, but he's backing it up, will lead to his execution very quickly. In fact, that's why most of the Gospels, the bulk of the Gospels, cover 1 week of Jesus' life, the last one. It is so important because it's there where the full revelation gets out and the conspiracy comes to a head very quickly to execute Jesus. And he does. He dies for the sins of the world. So at this point, it's not time. Why? Because his disciples still need to understand more. They're still learning. So he doesn't want that put out there. Besides, if they put that out there, they're going to have to defend it. They still barely understand it. And so this last part of Jesus' ministry is going to be to make sure the disciples truly understand. So when the day comes, they can stand and defend it. So again, the whole chapter comes back. Now, the interesting thing is this whole last scene happened at a place. There's a sign there. I'll show you where this is taken. This is probably, it looked very much like this when Jesus and his disciples were there. The villages around the area called Caesarea Philippi, this is high in the mountains of Mount Hermon. There is a cave. Basically, it's, for a long time they thought it was kind of the entrance, the gate to hell, or Hades, because anytime they would put a sacrifice in there, a live sacrifice, they put the animal in the cave, and the animal would die. And of course, modern science has realized there's gases coming up out of it, and the animals just basically suffocate. But this was a pagan shrine to the god Pan, to the Roman god Pan. And if you go there today, this is what it looks like. And I don't know if you can see in that photo. These are people here in the center. That's for scale. These waters right here, that's the headwaters, what become the Jordan River. So Jesus is here, and that, the line out of Matthew says, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." And you can kind of see him motioning over to the gates of hell right there. Paganism, the forces of evil are not going to stop what I'm going to build. And it gets built on the statement that Peter made, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Here's the long and short of it. These lessons all got repeated for the disciples because the one thing they had to know is the same thing we all need to know is who Jesus is. God the Son. Now, when we really believe that, when they really believe that, then their first instinct becomes prayer, trust, faith, going to Jesus with their needs. Not, how can I meet my need my own way, but, Lord, what do you want to do with this? What is your will in this situation? And so we seek him first. That's what's incredible, is when we get that way. And so the disciples after the resurrection, if you ever wondered, why are they now so bold? Because after the resurrection, then they really, really believed who Jesus was. It wasn't just some, hey, you guys, you can do some pretty cool things, but I don't want to bother you. No, after the resurrection, it's like every step they take, every breath they take is because of Jesus. And they would lay down their lives without question, without hesitation, because they knew who he really was. When we know who he really is, when we live like that, there's nothing God can't do through us. There's nothing we can't do for him. Amen? Amen. Let's pray. Our Father, thank you so much, Lord, for your word. Just for the amazing unity that you have in bringing everything together to help us to see these important truths. Lord, I pray that we could leave here and live by it. We love you. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Got one more song. Just stay seated, but